Today's sermon is dedicated to all people everywhere who have ever prayed for healing for themselves or others. Dedicated to anyone who has ever begged God for the life of a loved one. It's a sermon that has sprung up from our gospel reading for today from Mark chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. A reading that begins like this. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue named Jairus came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is a story about two daughters. One of them is the daughter of Jairus, who was just about 12 years old when she got so sick. The other is an unnamed daughter of Israel, a woman who had been hemorrhaging for that whole time. We don't know when the bleeding started. We only know that for 12 years it had not stopped. At first she thought it was only an anomaly in her regular cycle, a matter of things going on longer than they should have. But when 1 month merged into another and then another, she began to worry, thinking, if this keeps up, I'll bleed to death. And according to Jewish law, in those days, as long as that problem persisted, she could not attend services at the synagogue, could not sleep in the same bed as her husband, could not participate in the life of the community. The book of Leviticus was clear about this. She was unclean. And as long as this problem persisted, she would remain unclean. And so she went to the doctor. As Mark tells the story, that was only the beginning for her. After 12 years, she had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. I don't know how it was in those days, but I know how it is in these days. And because I do, I can imagine how it was. Can't you? She would have started with her regular physician, going to him and telling him that she didn't feel well, that she was bleeding and hadn't been able to get things under control. At first he might say, just go home and rest a while. Put your feet up. Let your husband do some of the work. And she would try that, but when it didn't work, she would come back and he might recommend some strong herbal teas. And finally some bitter coagulants that would give her the cramps but wouldn't keep the blood from flowing. At last he would shrug his shoulders and recommend a specialist. I know a gynecologist over in Tiberias. He would say he's good at this kind of thing. He would write down his name on a piece of paper, hand it over to her and say, there, he may be able to help you. But you know how it is. Tiberias was 10 miles away around the shore of the sea. She would have to find somebody who could take her, and then she would end up sitting in the waiting room half the day, hoping the receptionist would call her name. When she did, she would go in where the doctor would give her a quick look over, ask her a few questions, and then write out the name of a very expensive medication on his prescription pad. She wouldn't know how expensive until she stopped off at the pharmacy on her way home and wrote out a check for more than she and her husband had in their checking account. She would confess it to him when she got home, and he would say, it's all right. If it helps, it's worth it. We'll figure out a way to make this work. But he knew what it would mean. It would mean a second job for him, and for months afterwards, that's how it would be. She would lie there day after day, rationing out those pills, hoping to get better. He would go off to work early in the morning, come home late at night, stacking those few small coins on her bedside table like a love offering. But after a year of this, when nothing had changed, she would go back to that specialist in Tiberias and tell him how things were. His brow would wrinkle up. He would take another look at her and say, don't know what's happening here, not sure what to do, but I do know a surgeon in Jerusalem who has an experimental procedure he's had some success with. 4 out of 5 women have gotten better. Again, the little slip of paper. Again, the name of an unknown doctor in a faraway town. She would have brought the news home to her husband with a heavy heart. Just don't worry about it, she would say. I'll be fine. But he knew that wasn't true. She was down to skin and bones already, pale from the loss of blood. He didn't know how much longer she could live like this. We'll find the money somehow, he would say, squeezing her hand, giving her a kiss on the cheek, and then going off to sleep on the couch, or to try to sleep, tossing and turning through the night, worrying about money. Eventually, he worked it out, sold some property, borrowed some money from his brother-in-law. He loaded his wife up onto a donkey, making her as comfortable as he could for that long trip to Jerusalem. When they got there, they had to wait several days before the doctor could work her into his schedule, and even when he did, they almost wished later that he hadn't. He never came right out and said that he had botched the operation, but there were complications, a number of complications that left his patient in terrible pain, and the bleeding, if anything, worse than before. When she got on that donkey to go home a few days later, she was barely able to hold her head up, and little more than a statistic as far as the great surgeon was concerned, just that one woman out of 5 he was not able to help.